And welcome back to another exciting episode of the Public Speaking Expert Podcast. My name is Elliot Kay, and I am here every single week. We record live on LinkedIn and YouTube, so make sure that you're following me either on LinkedIn or on YouTube if you want to see the live recordings. But of course, we release this every week on the various platforms, so make sure that you are following us, subscribing, and of course, leaving us lovely comments for the Public Speaking Expert Podcast. Now, we're in season 2, and season 2 is all about influence. And today I have a guest. That's right. I mix it up. Sometimes you hear me all solo, and then other times I've got incredible guests. And today we're going to talk about stories that transform. Ooh, and I have an expert in her own right, Hannah Roberts, who we crossed paths, but we never spoke at the Speaker Awards last year. She blanked me. She's like, "Oh my God, I don't want to speak to you. You're so not cool." So yes, I'm going to speak to the other cool, like Jose and Simone, but you're no, I'm kidding me. I think we spoke at the bar at the end, didn't we, Hannah? I mean, this is a strange intro to a podcast, but that's when we.
I'm sure we had a chat.
I'm sure we did. I'm sure we did.
It was a great evening, though.
It was a fantastic evening, and it was a great day, and I'm looking forward to this year. And Hannah's got some exciting stuff coming up. She's going to Washington to speak, and she's going to all these places. I'm like, oh my God, I don't have anything as exciting as that yet lined up in my diary. I'm sure it's coming. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Elliot Kay, and I am one of the co-founders of the Public Speaking Expert Podcast. For those of you who used to listen with Jose, he's now flown away onto bigger heights. And this season, we're focusing on influence. And of course, we interview incredible experts, guests who always bring value. And our aim is to always give you something you can do after listening to the podcast, besides follow us and send us a comment and, all the nice things like that. So I've done this for over a decade now. I'm the co-founder of the Speaker Awards. I've written 6 books, and I work with people day in, day out to improve their speaking, for influence pace, for expert positioning. But today it's not about me, Hannah, is it? Today it's really about you. So welcome to the Public Speaking Expert Podcast. Thank you for doing this at really quite short notice. We only spoke last week, and you're like, cool, I'll be a guest. Yeah, boom.
You did. Not to freak me out and go, next week you will be live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and I'm never live on LinkedIn and YouTube.
Well, there you go. You are live on LinkedIn and YouTube. And for those of you watching live, I'm wearing a woolly hat because it's very cold in Devon. And, I'm kind of trying the Gary V look. Is it working? Is it kind of got that vibe going on?
It's got a vibe, Elliot. It's got your own personal vibe going on. No,
That's a very diplomatic answer, but there's a very practical reason I'm wearing it is because it's a little bit cold, and I keep turning my radiator on and off. But I convince myself that as long as my head is warm, then I'm warm. So
yeah, I run on quite a hot temperature, so I'm feeling pretty toasty here.
Oh, nice. Lucky you. So no woolly hat for you then, Hannah. But, if it works, the Gary V vibe, I might keep it on, but otherwise, maybe not. So, Hannah, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, you've had an incredible journey. You're a fascinating person from the conversations we've had. Share your life with our listeners.
Share my life? That's an open question.
Well,
I'll share what I'm doing now.
Yes, go for it.
And then we can talk a little bit about maybe how I got there, if that's of interest. But
yes, definitely.
Right now, I am coaching STEM women. So that is STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and maths. And I help people figure out what's next in their career and to make that happen. So that's the main focus.
Yes. And you are a STEM woman yourself, not to put you in a box or anything, but that's your background, right?
So my background is I'm a chemist, so technically an organometallic chemist, and then I went into biotechnology, but that doesn't really matter. I think the main thing is I liked setting things on fire.
So you're an arsonist.
We used to roll up the magnesium strips and put them into the wooden desks and then set them on fire when the teachers went out of the class. And I was a really goody two-shoes, but I still had to do that. So there was definitely always the chemist in me.
Excellent. So you didn't pursue a path in burning things down. You kind of built more of a positive, progressive path in life, I take it.
Yeah, so I did what I would call the unconscious career. Okay. So I made an active choice to step onto a career conveyor belt, as I like to call them. So I didn't get in to study medicine. So I just decided to do chemistry at university and just kind of stepped onto that path, and then things sort of unfold as you go along. So by the time I finished a degree, I went and did a graduate development program, got offered a PhD. Someone else recommended me for a postdoc, and before you know it, you haven't really made many choices consciously for quite some time.
Okay.
And
sorry, carry on.
No, I was just going to say it wasn't really until I was 2 weeks into a postdoc, pregnant on a 12-month contract, where I kind of decided, I really need to start to think about my career pathway in a much more intentional way.
Okay. So from there, because something that really fascinating when we talked, and you talked about you work with a lot of STEM women, but also you mentioned kind of the challenges they face, women in STEM, which is its own kind of unique space. So you're pregnant. You're like, okay, I've kind of just followed the path, so to speak. You followed the yellow brick road unconsciously.
Yeah.
And here you are. And was it some of the challenges you suddenly became aware of that made you change direction? And what were those challenges, if I may ask?
I think it started a little bit before that. So towards the end of my PhD, I just got married. I was thinking about starting a family. And I started to look around me, 2 steps ahead, like, where are all the women? What are all the women with children doing in academia, in science? And in a department of over 200, I found 5 women. And of those 5 women, only 2 had young children. So that's when the alarm bells started to ring for me, like, oh my goodness, is this even possible for me? And I'd conjured up this image of being like a part-time professor with, a couple of days at home with the kids, couple of days, and it just didn't seem to even exist. And that's when I started to come up against, well, how do I navigate this? And I'm on a 12-month contract. And so I needed to prove myself to continue in academia and even have a job to come back to. And it coalesces with the time to start writing a fellowship application and become an independent researcher. So I'm sat on maternity leave in front of a computer, and I just didn't know what to write at that stage. So I just closed the computer down, and that was sort of the end of my academic career. There's a real moment where for postdocs, 90% of postdocs are going to need to move beyond academia. There's just simply not the jobs for them. And for women, we're coming in some respects, in near equal proportions now. But when you look at the pathway, particularly in chemistry, there's only 8% of women become professors. So it's not really now, yes, we've done this great work on getting lots more women and those from underrepresented groups into the sciences, and there's still some gaps, definitely to close. But now for me, it's about the retention along that pipeline.
Okay. So while what you're saying is the kind of the space has come very far, but not far enough, because you're getting people in, but you're getting women in, but you're not doing enough to keep the women in, or you're not accommodating enough for women to want to stay around. Is that about right?
Yeah, I mean, I looked around and I didn't see anyone operating in a way that I thought was sustainable for me long term. It's a really competitive environment to be working in all the time, and people are working evenings, weekends as standard, and it's that kind of environment that doesn't support you, particularly if you choose to have and are able to have children. It all kind of coalesces. And until we have the systems and the policies in place, it's going to make it really difficult for women and underrepresented groups to thrive in in a biased environment.
So it's still very much a boys' club. Is that
I think
still
the
kind of
tide is
that?
turning, but I think it's things that are fundamental to the whole thing, like just having access to great childcare and accessing it and it being financially viable.
Right.
It's those fundamental things that actually make a really big difference, and it's the culture as well.
Okay.
So I always say to people, I was always looking ahead at what everyone else is doing and trying to emulate that behavior, and ended up in like a superwoman mode of I'm doing everything and flying around with my underpants on the outside, just to survive. And then if I'm doing that, all the next generation are coming through and looking, well, that's what I have to do to be able to do the next step. And I think people, in order to make a change, yes, policies and practices have to change, but in order to do that, individuals also have to have enough resource and power within themselves to be able to club together and make the change together.
I suppose the question that comes to mind, on one hand, I kind of picture Amy from the Big Bang Theory, kind of, I guess that's the most familiar image that people have. So someone like a woman in STEM who she speaks out very, very, she's very vocal about that as well, right? I guess the question is, how many people are as brave, or women are as brave as you to have built themselves up to that point in their career and then go, I'm out. Like, would you not fight for everything you've built so far? I mean, is that where you come in to help women find that bravery? Or because we know it's inside everyone, right? We know everyone has it inside of them, but is that where you kind of come in to help unlock and go, look, you can carry on and let me help you be the best potential woman in STEM you can be, or let me help you transition? I mean, I know there's several questions there, but I guess what are the barriers for women to kind of go, well, I've just spent 10 years of my life doing this and I'm out? Is it because it's not that simple, is it?
I think that's the crux of the problem, because we put so much time in a PhD. For some people, it depends where you do your PhD. It can be 4 years all the way up to like 9-10 years.
Right, yeah.
And then postdocs that can last between, 1 year for me, but people can go on for another decade of postdocs to try and make that academic pathway work. And often the choice of that academic pathway comes all the way back to the choice of an 8-year-old you who decided they were going to be a scientist, and actually haven't along the way stopped to consider that over time you change as a person, and therefore your priorities change as well. And your choices may want to change, but sometimes we just get locked into a pathway. And I think what I do work with women at that precipice of, do I continue or do I make a change here? And sometimes the choice has been taken out of your hands because things aren't working, not because you're not a good enough scientist, but actually because sometimes it just doesn't work. You don't get the big paper, you don't get whatever it is, or all the things coalesce at the same time. So I help people thrive in that environment, help and support people to do that should they choose to, but I also help people move beyond without feeling like a failure. And sometimes, the vast majority of my clients now actually are already in, corporates or other positions beyond academia, and they're still coming up against the same kind of problems. And it's replaying out this kind of like superwoman mode, this push, prove myself, pleasing personality, perfectionism, all that kind of stuff. It's still happening. And so we still need to unpick that and where it's come from.
So at what point do they find you? Is it a case of, I need to change, let me look for Hannah Roberts type person? Or is it like, I've hit so much pain now and I know I can't go on? I know it's probably a mixture of both, but which one dominates for you? Is it a case of like, I'm at a crossroads, I'm frustrated, I'm fed up with the industry, I don't know what to do? Or they're more like, hey, I just need to be a better person, let me find Hannah Roberts? Which one shows up more for you?
Yeah, so I kind of have a little, you'd probably call it the hero's journey, like a pyramid of steps where I think people kind of progress through. So we talked about the unconscious phase of picking something, but then it just goes unconscious over time. Then we get to the, unfulfilled stage. So if I have been pleasing, pushing, and proving for so long, now I feel underappreciated, underpaid for all of that hard work, undervalued as well. Maybe I've been overlooked for a position. And then we get to the unsustainable part, which is, I can't actually do this for another 25 years plus in my career. Something has to change. And sometimes you might change a job and find that you've got the same issues. So it's not the thing that needs to change necessarily. Something inside you needs to change in order to see something differently, do something differently.
Okay. So it is tend to be at a pain point, right? It is literally at a pain point.
For me, in my stage, I was definitely at a pain point.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose that's probably why you've got like that layer of empathy that maybe other coaches or mentors might not have. It's because you're actually working with women who are 2, 3 years you ago or 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, well, quite some time now ago. Shows my
Yes.
age. But I fully understand the challenges. And I think a lot of my clients come through and they say, I'm working with you because I know you understand what I'm going
Right.
through. And you've also managed, I did lots of stuff when I was in Superwoman mode, Elliot. I was doing a scientific project manager job. I also started a spin out company with 3 other female academics. I had 2 kids at the time. I would swim like competitively. I'm very good at doing Superwoman mode, so I can spot one a mile off.
Yeah. And is that, I mean, because before we go into kind of the theme, a little, because one of the signs of imposter syndrome is overachieving. So do you think that played a role in you being Superwoman? Is that whole like, I don't want to be found out, so I have to do everything at the best? Because a lot of people think imposter syndrome is just hiding away and not doing thing. But there's the complete extreme opposite, isn't there? Which is the overachiever, the overdoer, the Superwoman or the Superman. Do you think that played a part at all, or is that just not
Yeah, I
for
mean,
you
for me,
anyway?
imposter syndrome is like the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
It's the
Got it.
signs and the symptoms of what's going on, whether that's not being able to speak up, procrastinating on work, overdoing work, whatever the symptoms are for you. But actually, the underneath that tip of the iceberg is the vast majority of what's going on. And
Right.
most of that is rooted in some kind of fear, whether
Okay.
that's fear of failure, fear of being substandard, being, feeling shame because of that, fear of fear itself. Oh my goodness, I feel afraid. Oh, I'm scared of feeling afraid.
Yeah.
There's some kind of emotion that we really don't want to feel, that we kind of suppress and put towers of behavior over the top. Pushers, pleasers, perfectionists, rule makers, all the things that outwardly we look successful, but underneath there's a huge amount of fear and vulnerability that needs to be unlocked and dealt with in order to be able to. It's a bit like Brené Brown talks about shedding the armor. It's about taking it, being able to take it all off. And that's when you're coming back to your true and authentic self,
Uh-huh.
as opposed to this version of you that's like fighting your way through your career.
Okay. So very interesting stuff. And I think we could carry on talking for a very long time because
I
there's a
know.
lot to unpack here, right? There's so many different ways we can go. I suppose the thread to this is how much do the stories we tell ourselves impact, and then how can we reframe them for transformation? So let's again, and we've just had Jason send us a message on LinkedIn saying, "Hi Elliot and Hannah, nice to see you both. I'm very excited to hear about how stories lead to transformation." So let's start with the first one. The stories that we tell ourselves obviously can become obstacles or become self-fulfilling prophecies. So do you see that within the clients you work with as well, and how does that impact them?
Oh, it's huge. I would say it's one of the biggest things, the biggest challenge for myself, but also for my clients too. We tell ourselves stories all of the time, and I call them stories because we attach some kind of meaning to a story. And like you said, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as well. Whereas the vast majority of our thoughts are not the truth. And when people can start to observe thoughts that are just thoughts, not reality, then we can start to get some separation from those thoughts as well. So as an example, if you had an email, Elliot, and it said, "Come and see me now," and it's from your boss, I know you don't have a boss, what would you make that mean? What would be the story around that?
I think it depends on the relationship I had with that boss, right? So if it was even though I was aware they're a boss, but we had a good relationship and it's always been very friendly, and I had anyone come see me now, my thoughts would be very different from if I didn't have a good friendly relationship and come see me now. So yeah, One would be
Yeah.
like, oh my God, this is the end. It's not you, it's me kind of conversation. And the other one would be like, yeah, he wants to see me. Let me go. Right. So, yeah, absolutely two different stories.
Two different stories. And I think that's the point. We can make up a multitude of different stories. Say you're a woman in science and you're in that mode of needing to prove yourself and seek approval from those in leadership positions, and you're feeling like everyone around you is so much better than you, and you get an email and it says, come and see me now. You're going to go, oh my goodness, what did I do wrong? I'm going to go through all my emails to find out where it, if I can preempt what's going to happen next. And then we attach emotions to those thoughts, we start to get anxious, and then we take actions based on how we think and feel about ourselves. And so I always say to my clients, when you get into that cycle of thinking, how do I separate out the truth from the story? What's the absolute truth? The only truth in all of that was you got an email from your boss.
Right.
Everything else is a story attached to that one truth.
Yeah. And I think, when I studied cognitive behavioral hypnotherapy.
Ooh, check you out.
Thing. I remember they talking about, you have the thoughts that you have to think, because our brain has beautiful. This is more your space than mine, right? But you have our brain has to produce thoughts. It's one of those things, our brain. But then there's the thoughts around the thoughts, and that's what I call a thought spiral. Yes. And it's knowing where to put the stop and go, let me stop this spiral, because this is where cognitive issues start, right? A lot of again, I'm watching Breaking Point right now have you watched it on
I have not, no.
Netflix? And they follow, the up and coming tennis players around. And you'll notice a lot of them talking about, they don't call it that, the thought spiral. So they start to think, I'm not good, I'm losing this match. And then this whole thought spiral. So you're saying the same thing. It's like, look, you just had a thought. Let's not go on this spiral. And let's put the stop sign there and go, you just had an email that said, come see me now. Yeah. Right. But how easy is that for
It's not easy to do that. It's one thing to observe the thought as just a thought. But the problem is we always attach an emotion to a thought. And I think it's the sisters Emily and Amelia Nagoski in their book called Burnout, where they talk about emotions being like a tunnel. You've activated emotion, you're in the middle of like a tunnel. So you can't just stop thinking a thought and expect yourself to move out of the tunnel. It's a bit like being chased by a saber-toothed tiger or a tiger. And you get activated by the adrenaline and get pumped up with the cortisol. And then the zookeeper comes, catches the tiger, takes it away. You don't suddenly feel, oh, I feel better now. You're like, oh, I'm still feeling the emotion. So it's not just enough to shift the thought process. You have to also move through the emotion as well.
So it's about honoring the emotion. It's not about denial of it or suppression of it. It's about, well, look, let me just be honest to how I feel about it. Is that right?
Not just honest, because most of us take an emotion that we don't want to feel and we go, oh, I don't want to feel that. Let's put a trapdoor on top of that. Right. I'm fine. But inside, you're not. It's about being able to, yes, recognize you have an emotion, but also do something to shift it. Play a piece of music, dance it out, go for a run, shake it out.
Listen to this podcast.
Who wanted to shift some anger, got a baseball bat. She actually bought a baseball bat and started hitting a mattress with the baseball bat to just move through emotions. So I think that's one of the things that we often don't allow ourselves, and it can keep us stuck for a long time in our heads.
Well, as long as it's just a mattress she uses that baseball bat for, I think.
Better a mattress than somebody's face.
Exactly. Yeah. I had the image. Oh, she just picked up the baseball, started smashing someone. I was like, well, that's not surely a good thing to do. So that's good.
No, let's not advocate for that.
Come to Hannah Roberts and let's smash people up. No, I'm kidding. Of course not. Of course not. Sorry, I just kicked the microphone with my leg. So that's the kind of the negative side of storytelling, right? So we all tell ourselves stories and we all buy into our own stories, and then we add emotion to it, add these layers to it. But equally, if we flip it, stories are amazing tools for transformation, right? So I guess once you learn to observe the thought and you learn to not use a baseball bat on someone, but use it on a mattress or whatever you choose, run, whatever your go-to thing is, as long as, again, I think we have to qualify that you know, if you are going to find something to do, it has to be something constructive and productive and positive, you know, because a lot of people equally create escapist behavior. You know, they drink, they'll eat, they'll comfort eat, you know. So we have to find something that's good for us at the same time. And one of them is really using stories to transform, using stories to move forwards, to let go. Do you want to kind of let us into that bit? Because I know this is your thing. So tell us, how can stories be transformation? I know this from a speaker point of view and an audience point of view, but I'd love to hear it from a scientific and your point of view.
I'm not sure I have a scientific version. I use stories speaking and training, and also when I'm in coaching sessions. So there are different kinds of stories that we use. There's the transformational tale, where you think this is where the person is now, this is where they want to get to, and then something, what's that moment of transformation? What's the thing that they need to understand or hear in order to move them through? And it can be a really, really simple, like, short story that you can tell them about. Oh yeah, I was down the road the other day and I saw this guy and he was, you know, going shopping. And you can make it like as if you're just having a rapport moment at the beginning of a session, but actually you're telling them a transformational tale. And they might come back the next week and say, I was thinking about that guy who went shopping and blah, blah, blah. And then I went and did blah, blah, blah. So they can be really great ways of instilling the transformation without telling them what you're up to.
How clever do you need to be to do that? Like,
Not
I guess
clever at all, do you? You just need to know, like, that's where they are, that's where they need to be, what do they need to know, and then just make up a story around it. We've had
right.
ones about exploration, and I talked about mermaids, being in a pod of mermaids, and you can, I mean, if you're a creative person, you can really go to town on these stories, so you can have a lot of fun with them.
Yeah.
You know, it's always great to bring fun into your life. But when I'm coaching from stage, I'll tell other types of stories. So there's the elephant, which is like a story that everybody's always going to remember.
Go on. Do we have time? Is it a long story?
No, I can do you a short story.
Let's do an elephant short story. Go on. I'm intrigued. Tell me the story about the elephant.
So if I told you, I've said a little bit about my pathway and how when I was a postdoc, I got pregnant. And just before I went on maternity leave, I was offered a series of advice from, you know, the people around me. They'd say, after 2 weeks after giving birth, I just got a nanny. Someone else would say to me, oh, I wrote my fellowship in the first 12 weeks after giving birth. They don't do much for the first. Someone else said, make it look like maternity leave never happened. And that really left me feeling like I needed to prove myself. So 5 days after having the 1 liter hemorrhage after giving birth, I was back on the computer, typing away furiously, getting project reports from across. It was madness, absolutely madness. Something had to change. I had to change. I had to be different. An elephant. You're not going to forget someone talking about being back on a computer 5 days after nearly dying. not to be dramatic, it wasn't that bad. But it's things like that, telling stories that people remember. I often tell stories about my kids as well. They're very memorable.
Yeah. No, you're definitely pulling me in there as well with that story. And obviously the strength with stories is you immediately put yourself in that person's shoes without having to do much. Like, it's not like close your eyes, imagine you're me. Like, you don't have to do any of that. So do you have a particular technique? I mean, does this come from NLP, hypnosis, or you're just very good at it? I mean, probably all three, right? Because there's people that are natural storytellers without having any training. They're just really great at it. But because you're using this for transformation, are you very conscious of the language you use and the pacing and the tone? Tell us a little bit. Let's unpack that a little bit, because you were slowing down at certain points. So you're changing your tonality. Were you also aware of how the language would land on the other person listening?
I mean, for that one, I was just telling you a story. If I was doing it from stage, I would do things quite differently. So I don't know if I am a natural storyteller. I think it's something that I've learned how to do. And in fact, I did a great training with Dr. Joanna Martin a couple of years ago, where we looked at different stories and different story techniques as well. So I've had a lot of training there. If I was telling a story from stage, you probably know this already, Elliot, but if I'm talking about the past, I will be stood in the place in the brain where we're thinking about the past. So for me, stood facing you, I would go to the right over here. And when I'm talking about the future, I would go and stand at a different part of the stage over here, when I want them to be in their power and be positive and think long-term future. I can do this. In my brain, it's obviously the other way around. So you've got to remember to walk the right way because you're mirroring the other person. But I think my brain has rewired to past and future on the other sides now, having done it a few times. So there's that piece of placing and being in the right place to help anchor in the thoughts. And the other thing is being able to pause. So you talked about people being able to put themselves in the story. It doesn't matter if the story matches. I can tell a story about giving birth and all that kind of stuff, and it still land for somebody who's never given birth before, someone of a different gender and nationality, whatever it is, because it's finding what's in it for them. You're always searching for a meaning and putting yourself, like you said, in the story somehow. But asking the question, something had to change for me, something had to be different. Just asking the question, perhaps you've had a moment like that in your life too. Helps people go, when did I have my moment where I thought something had to change? And they'll take themselves right back to that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also because our brain has to answer that question. It cannot not answer it. Right? I use the double negative. Cannot not. Oh dear. Can our brain process double negatives? I'm not sure. Apparently, unconscious mind can't process negatives, but I'm not sure about that. Anyway, I just thought I'd ask a philosophical question there. There you go. Getting all deep here.
No answer for that.
I thought you knew everything, Hannah. Such a disappointment. No kidding.
No. Do you know, the more that you get into research and science, the more you know that
you don't know,
the less you know.
Yeah, I think that's just I think that's just a general growth thing. The more I feel I've evolved and grown, the more I realize the less I know. It's like there was a part of me years ago, like, oh, I know this stuff. And the more I dove into, actually, I don't know any of this stuff. And even though, look, I've done this, surely I've mastered that now. I think my TEDx talks about that a little bit, right? I've got this mastery level, but then it just opens up this whole other level where you're back to nothing, not back to nothing, but you just don't know. So I think I completely relate to that. So to anyone that wants to use stories for transformation, what would be your kind of top tips? What would you say for anybody watching, listening? What's the Hannah Roberts special?
The special. I would draw like a little triangle. So I'm like drawing it now. But put at the bottom of the triangle where they are. Put at the other side of the bottom of the triangle where they want to be. Just in like one word. They're stuck or they're upset or they're whatever it is, where they want to be. And then at the top of the triangle, what is the transformation for them? What's the thing that is going to help them get there? So you mapped out the 3 different points, and then have fun. Think about wrapping a story around that with your own experience, someone you know, some creative thing where you can think about Disney characters or whatever you want to do, and help them get from point A to point B through that transformation. And say it as if, not like I've got a story for you, I've got a transformational tale for you. Just lightly, I was thinking, and then just leave it in there and continue.
So you're embedding it.
You're just planting that story there and letting them sleep on it or think about it later. And then something will drop in and land for them.
What's your favorite story besides the elephant? You don't have to tell it, just out of interest. Do you have a favorite story?
A favorite story? Like a reading book, that kind of story.
Anything. I'm
Hmm.
just intrigued as we're talking about stories. Do you have a favorite story?
I know. I read, do you know, I read really, really widely. So I read
Mhm.
a lot of books, but something that captured my attention like over and over again have been the Harry Potter stories.
I had a feeling you'd say that. I don't know why. So funny.
Really?
Yeah, my wife loves it. I've never read them. I can't read. I'm dyslexic. So it's really hard for me. I could listen to the audiobook if I really wanted to.
Yeah.
But yeah, because it's all about
There's something
imagination.
about it that just transports me in my own mind into those scenarios. So I don't know if it's the language, but there's something that captures me about those stories.
Amazing. And do you have a favorite story to tell on stage that you feel has the biggest wow, the biggest impact?
Yeah, I do sometimes do what's called a story loop. So
Oh,
when
yeah.
I do a longer event, so if it's more than a day, so if it's 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, I will open three stories, three separate stories, and get them to the point where they're just over the worst danger point or the emotional point. And then at the end, I will close all three loops in one go. And I might use music or something subliminal as we're going through to also like instill the message as you're going along. I guess it's like an extended version of a transformational tale. But sometimes there'll be things happening in the stories, and for no reason, you'll make a little transition, doing all of your satire categories. And suddenly you'll be transported to somewhere else, and they're like, oh, what just went on? What was that story about? And they don't really get it, but we never leave a good story unfinished.
That is important. It's quite funny. I'll quickly tell you this. When we did the conference, the Speaker Awards, we did the experts conference. I
Yes.
told the story that you're always selling. Do you know that?
No.
Do you remember? So I talked about always selling. And I talked about a time I went to see this speaker and I was sitting in the front row and I was waiting eagerly to see this speaker. And I saw these other speakers. And I was like, yes, it's getting closer to this other speaker. Oh my God, I'm so excited to see him. And I was in the front row. So obviously I didn't want to lose the seat either. And then just before that speaker came on, they had a quick break and I needed the loo. So I looked behind me and I could see the queue for the loo. But then I know, because having done events, you kind of know there's always one near the stage. So I looked around the corner, I noticed the fire exit was open. So, and there was a toilet there. So I snuck round and I went into that toilet. As I'm standing there doing my thing, who comes next to me? The speaker I'm about to see, right? And I'm like, oh my God, this is awkward. I'm standing here. He's next to me. Be cool, man. Be cool. So anyway, I finish up and I turn around and I wash my hands and do what you're supposed to do when you finish going to the toilet. He turns around. He looks himself in the mirror, brushes his hair a little bit and walks out. And I could not believe it. I was, from that moment onwards, all I could think about is the fact that he hadn't washed his hands. So when I went and sat in my seat, my whole relationship had changed with that speaker. And I just kept looking at him going, oh my God, you didn't wash your hands. You're touching the pens. And that's all I could think about. And it completely distorted the sales process. As a result of telling that story at a conference, everybody went, no, it's okay. I washed my hands. Like that just became a thing throughout the whole conference. Everyone kept declaring that they'd washed their hands. So it's quite funny that that's what they took away. No, they took away other stuff from my talk, but that's the thing they remember. What's that?
What they took away from the whole conference was you must wash your hands.
Yeah, that affects the sales process, right? So yeah, I just thought I'd share that story with you because I think the impact, and again, sometimes I found, you might find this, is the message you intended isn't the message that they're going to take away. I mean, the good thing is they remember the story, they remember the point I was making, but the other thing, I guess, it raised hygienic questions like, it's okay, I've washed my hands, don't worry, I'm not a skanky person. So yeah, that's quite
I haven't
funny.
heard the word skanky since high school.
Well, there you go. Maybe I'm showing my age. What can I say? It's my birthday next month as well. I shall not reveal that I will be 22 next month. But hey, we have had a question here. What do you think? What role do you think stories play in shaping our identities? And that's from Jason. Oh, I'd love to hear your answer on that, and then we'll start wrapping up. Wow, deep. We need to do a podcast on that.
And I have just come off a 2-day event talking about wholeness and identity and letting go of the armor that surrounds ourselves to be able to be more of ourselves. I think our whole identity is a story. We tell ourselves stories all the time about who we are, what type of person we are, what judgments we have over other people, what we're allowed to do, not allowed to do. And I think if we let go of all of the story around who we are, we get to actually become more of who we want to be as well.
Wow. So they have a huge role in shaping our identity.
I tell myself a story all the time about my current identity and who I am and what type of person I am and what I'm up to in the world and what I want to be.
That makes sense. Now I think back, even just thinking of some of the thoughts I've had in the last few days. You have that, I'm not that kind of person, or is it an age thing? And you start to tell yourself a story, it's this, it's that. And they're like, no, I remember even myself calling myself out and going, no, that's BS, stop. Because it's a story. So Jason, to answer your question, and of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Hannah. We're going to say how people reach out to you in a minute. But yeah, I think you're right. I think, it's a huge shaper of our identities because we're continuously reinforcing it for good or for bad. Or even if we're a very positive person, there'll be a little voice in us. And if we enforce that voice, then we're buying into that story, right?
And I think we're always continuously evolving our identities as well. If you think about how your identity has changed over time, it will have been a huge shift over, depends how old you are, but over a time period, should we
22.
just say. Yeah. I'm a very different person now to the person who is Superwoman. I'm a different person to the person who got rejected to do medicine. I'm a different you grow and you evolve over time, and therefore the story surrounding you evolves as well.
Something that's come to me having had this conversation with you is like, it just made me remember, I think I wrote this, I can't remember, my first book, maybe my third book, I can't remember. But I remember writing that sometimes you have to be so close to your dreams to realize it's not the dream you want anymore. And when I hear, and having interviewed you today and really getting to know you a little bit more, I'm hearing you had what you thought was a dream and you followed a path to only realize that wasn't your dream anymore. And then you found your own way from there. And in effect, the dream story, whatever we call it, you give yourself a different frame and you gave yourself a different chance. And now you're living a completely different life, which is fulfilling and rewarding. And you get to work with people in the space you were in. And I'm sure outside of that as well, to help them through that. And I think that's incredible that you've done that. And I'd like to acknowledge you for that and encourage you to keep up all your amazing work. Not that you're probably ever thinking of stopping, but, should that moment come, remember this voice.
No, I think for this career path, it's the first time I've said to myself, I need to see this all the way through. It doesn't matter what barriers I come up against, doesn't matter what's happening. There's something in me that's like, this is the one, keep following that thread. Yeah. I've had plenty of careers that feel like they've gone back to the start line, but this is the one that's going to extend out for me.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you for taking your time out to share your knowledge and expertise, wisdom and stories with us. Hannah, how do people get in touch with you?
I will remember to wash my hands.
Yes, definitely remember that one. So how do people get in touch with you? What do they need to do? This is your time to invite people to connect with you, however you want to do it. Over to you, Hannah.
I think the easiest way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. So I'm really active on LinkedIn, and you can send me a direct message or questions, that kind of thing. And I would love to hear from you.
There we go, LinkedIn. Hannah Roberts. There is a doctor in front of your name on LinkedIn, isn't there? Am I imagining that?
I have PhD after my name, but yes, I'm a doctor, but not the medical kind. So don't send me questions about your eczema and your asthma and your heart attacks. or
baseball bats.
Because I can't remember any of it. So send me your questions that are relevant, either about stories or if you are related to women in STEM and you're trying to figure out what's next in your career and make it happen with balance, confidence, fulfillment. I'm the person to help with that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hannah, for being with us today, for taking time out. I feel like we could carry on for hours, but we all have things we need to do. We can go deep and would be like a 24-hour podcast. Maybe that's something we can talk about, a world record or something. But anyway, it's another conversation.
That would be fun, Elliot. Let's do that.
That would be fun. I don't know if it would be. Anyway, there we go. Listen, have an amazing rest of the day. Thank you again for being on the Public Speaking Expert podcast. Please remember, everybody, we record live every Monday and we release it a few weeks down the line. So make sure you like, subscribe. And of course, if you're enjoying what you are listening to, send us a comment. If you send us a comment, I'll send you a book as a thank you. So make sure you do it. Till next time, be seen, be heard, and always be more giraffe. And in this case, tell great stories. See you later, people. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.